Hi, welcome back, everyone. I wanted to try to get some charts available to sort of like be more, I guess, classy about it. Like, itemize the list, but I mean, like, it takes me a long time to type things out. So I was like, I'll never get around to it if I do that. Like, it'll take me like days. So I have everything in memory, and I'm not going to replay the clip because, like, if you watched my very, very, very long LGBTQ video, like about Pride Month and being Pride and all that. Um, there's no need to replay it. I mean, like, I'll leave the link to the video. You can go and watch it for yourself if you want to rewatch that. But I wanted to focus on this from a philosophical perspective instead of, from like any kind of political perspective, because the argument that the conservative twins put forward is really, really bad. When you look at it from a philosophical perspective, I mean, like, there were so many fallacies, so many. It was ridiculous. So I don't. This video shouldn't be anywhere near as long, but I wanted to like step back from politics, like after making that, and see like all these things that the fact that people think that some of the things that they're bringing up are related to the LGBTQ community says to me there's a big problem because these things are not representative of the LGBTQ community. Being LGBTQ is not an ideology. There's no prescriptive personality that one has to have be LGBTQ anything. Like, you can be LG. Like, let me tell you what an ID. Like, give you a list of ideologies. Okay, like this is a fallacy that they make, is saying that, I mean, just in general. Okay, anarchism is an ideology. Okay, just the following things are going to be ideologies: anarchism, libertarianism, free market capitalism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, evangelicism. Did I say libertarianism? But socialism, communism, religion in general. Those are like examples of ideologies. There is no specific criteria of LGBTQ people other than like it's just a label that, like, I mean, like, it's a series of labels for sexual orientation and gender identification. That's it. Like, you can be LGBTQ, you can be a Christian, you can be Islamic, you can be Jewish, you can be a libertarian, you can be conservative, you can be, for some reason, a fascist. I don't know why you would want to do that. I would think that would be bad for your health. You can be a socialist, you can be a communist, you could be an anarchist, you could be just into the Democrat Party, neoliberalism. You can be LGBTQ and be a million different ideologies that are out there. There's no specific prescription of lifestyle that you have to do. You can be a hippie and be LGBTQ. You can be a like yuppie businessman and be LGBTQ. So there's no real ideology. If you think that that's wrong, I would love to hear what you think LGBTQ ideology is. And I have a feeling asking that question, I'm going to get something very stupid that it isn't. So I'll deal with that when I get to it, if that happens. So what the conservative twins do, this is bad philosophy, bad debate, like from the get-go. They do not start with a premise, which when you start with a conclusion and then build your premise, that's called begging the question. So what they do is they give this list of traits, a list of things. They say, we don't want you to talk gay. We don't want you to act gay. We don't want you to, or LGBTQ anything. Don't talk, don't walk, don't act, don't dress, don't do anything LGBTQ, especially in public. So, first of all, I mean, there's so many problems. First of all, I don't know what don't talk gay means, or any of those, like LGBTQ. I don't know what that is. I've met heterosexual guys, straight guys that are very feminine, and they're not gay. They're not LGBTQ anything. They're just a heterosexual cis person that happens to be pretty feminine. They exist. Likewise, there are LGBTQ people that, when it comes to a male, a biological male, tend to be very masculine, which most people wouldn't expect. So I'm not really sure what that means. There's no definition that's given as to what specifically that is, or what specifically they do when they meet somebody that is heterosexual cis, which, by the way, cis literally comes from biochemistry. A friend of mine explained this to me. It comes from biochemistry, and it literally is, in biochemistry, the opposite of transition. The opposite of transition is cis in biochemistry. That's where that word comes from. I didn't know that, but that's interesting. So that's where it comes from. That's a legitimate word. It's not new. It's an actual science word dealing with biochemistry. So that's interesting. But there's no definition as to what this is, and like, what do you do when you meet a heterosexual cis person that fits what you've defined as these characteristic traits that you don't want to see? Do they get held to the same scrutiny as LGBTQ people? What about the LGBTQ people that don't fall under these categories? Are they still held to the scrutiny, or is that okay because you can't tell? ultimately the overall message is we don't want to be able to tell that you're LGBTQ. There's a word for that. It's called being in the closet, which they always backtrack on that and double down and divert. They say, oh, no, we don't mean you have to be in the closet. And it's like, well, what else is that then? You don't want us to say, I'm openly gay. That's a no-no. You don't want us to be openly gay. You don't want to even be able to tell. You know, like anything that is surrounding that, it's all supposed to be behind. That's in the closet. That's closeted. That's what that is. Like, you can try to rationalize that all you want. That's what it is. Like, I'm not trying to say that to defend the LGBTQ community. I'm not saying it to go against them. I'm just saying, like, literally, that's what that is. You are literally saying LGBTQ people go back in the closet. So this is, you know, this is a very funky line of reasoning, because what that is, that list is really nothing more than a conclusion. And so it's like you've created, you know, a begging the question, circular reasoning, ambiguity, and a straw man all in one foul swoop. That's pretty embarrassing. But I doubt these people have done any research on or done any studying of logic, critical thinking, and philosophy at all. And in fact, a lot of people that I see going around the internet talking about debate generally aren't engaging in what would be academically considered a debate. A lot of the times what it is nothing more than the equivalent of running into a stranger on the street that just wants to, it's just nothing more than a verbal, like, casual argument between two people, like, you know, like running to a random stranger on the street that tells you that his dog happens to be God, and can offer no evidence to that, which that gets into inductive reasoning, and I'll get into that later. So, you know, they give this conclusion. Okay, so that's a conclusion. So then the reason why it's called begging the question is you're like, okay, why? Where's the premise? Where's the premise that leads to this conclusion? And if you know anything about deductive reasoning, you do not start with a conclusion and then look for evidence or information to build your premise. That is that's just deductively unsound. That's not deductive reasoning. That is confirmation bias is what that is. Another fallacy. So they eventually get to that, though, and what they say is, first, and this is, you know, straw man, this is a weak premise, this is just crap. I mean, like, if you were to try to present this in an academic environment as far as the philosophy goes, when you start off saying, well, it's environmental, so meaning it's a learned behavior, so that's the narrative they're running with. It's environmental. And they run with that until then they say, well, it's nature, meaning genetic, and environmental. It can't be both environmental and nature at the same time. It's one or the other. You can't say it's environmental and it's also environmental and natural. You're saying it's a learned behavior, but it's also a learned behavior and genetics, all three at the same time. That's silly. Like, why would you say that? You know, that's being repetitive, that's redundant, that's problematic in creating a philosophical argument in the get-go as well. Like, you know, that's a problem. Okay, but so here's the problem. This is a really weak premise, because they're trying to, I think by saying environmental and genetics at the same time, I think they're trying to cover both ends. Okay, I will tell you what we actually understand from science. We know it has something to do with epigenetics. We have no idea what triggers the epigenetics. We don't know. There's several theories on the table, but we can find examples of where these theories don't apply. So it's like, we know it has something to do with epigenetics, but we have no clue what activates those epigenetics. Not a clue. We just don't know. We don't know. And I would wonder if it would be ethical to find out. I mean, you know, we can use science and we can find out. Science itself is not inherently ethical or unethical. It's what you do with it that makes it ethical or unethical. You know, if you want to find out because you just want to know, that's one thing. But if you want to find out because you want to play Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and you want to play God and you want to use our current understanding of genetic, being able to genetically modify people to genetically make it so that no LGBTQ people are ever born again, you know, then you're stepping into the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein sort of aspect of playing God. And the big question comes up, okay, is that ethical to do? I mean, you know, these are not violent offenders. That's not how that works. There's no real moral argument, and that goes into something else I don't want to get into, because in creating a moral argument for or against being LGBTQ, you can't really turn to nature, you can't really turn to the Bible, you have to sort of go like hands down meta ethics, and there just is no argument that exists for or against. hold on a second. So here, this is okay. So going back to, so here's the issue. This is really easy to debunk. Okay, I don't know the exact percent, but it's the majority. I'm just gonna say, to keep numbers simple, just to keep it simple. I'm not gonna know the exact percent, but it's gonna be the mass majority. So I'm gonna say something like 99, and I could go as far to say 99.99. I'm just gonna leave it at 99, just to be courteous to the people who are for the narrative against what I'm saying. 99% of LGBTQ people come from heterosexual households. I mean, that's where the majority of LGBTQ people come from, is heterosexual households. On the other side, you could ask the question, okay, are there any LGBTQ people that have kids? And the answer is, well, yes. There are examples of, like, let's say you have two gay guys that are a couple, and then two lesbians that are a couple. So two gay guys, one of the guys freezes their sperm in a turkey baster, gives it to the lesbian couple. They do what they do with it. 9 months gestation, out pops a child. It's an on your honor system. When you live in poverty, you can't afford a lawyer to work this stuff out, so it's an on your honor system. A lot of the times it does work out, but just fine. So you have, like, the child grows up in a very interesting dynamic because they have two moms and two dads that sort of take turn taking care of them. So this is a child that not only grows up with both the environmental and the nature. So they're growing up, they're made out of LGBTQ, or, like, the genetics of two gay guys and the genetics of two lesbians. So they've got the LGBTQ genetics in there, and they're growing up in the in LGBTQ environment. They've got two moms, they've got two dads. This is a very non-traditional family, but do they grow up LGBTQ, or do they grow up heterosexual, cis, straight? Well, this is the interesting thing, is that when LGBTQ people, even when it's their genetics and they grow up in an LGBTQ environment, they have the same likelihood of being LGBTQ as heterosexual people, which is 1 in 10 chance, not very likely. And we do have living examples of children that are the biological child of a lesbian and a gay guy, and are raised by either two lesbians, two gay guys, or both, and they grow up straight, heterosexual, cis. Okay, so we have a ton of LGBTQ people that come from heterosexual households, and we have, it's a very small percent because LGBTQ people don't very often procreate, but it does happen. So, like, you've got this small percent, I don't know what now, let's say 1% of kids that come from LGBTQ people, and they turn out heterosexual and cis. So they've got both elements there. Genetic, so that's nature, and environmental, in that they grow up around it. So how is it that they're okay? So this whole, they learn it, influential, that gets destroyed. Genetic argument gets destroyed. So even though they're in the environment, which you would think would activate the epigenetics, turns out that doesn't do that. And they've got the epigenetics because they came from two parents that have them. Okay, so the whole, it's environmental and biological falls apart really fast. I mean, I don't know how you defend that position at that point, because you have living examples where it just doesn't make sense. All right, so we've gone over that falls apart, very basic analysis, straw man, deductively unsound, prescriptive conclusion, confirmation bias, gross overgeneralization. Oh yeah, the gross overgeneralization. The gross overgeneralization being that this conclusion that they give, as they're like that. So basically, their premise is, being LGBTQ is environmental and biological, therefore LGBTQ people should not be presented because it could influence more LGBTQ people to be LGBTQ. So the gross overgeneralization comes in these characteristics that they think is being LGBTQ. That's a gross overgeneralization. You're making an assumption. Not every guy who's feminine is a homosexual. Not every girl that is masculine is a homosexual. Not everybody who cross-dresses or dresses in different clothing is trans or identifies as non-binary. A great example of that is the lead singer of Tool. He's dressed in drag for many years for his stage shows. He does not, I think, identify as a homosexual. I don't think he identifies as bisexual. I think he's married. I'm not sure all of that, but this is just something that he does. And, he kind of gets fussy with the press when they press him on this issue. He's like, look, not everything is a statement of the far left and the far right. It's just, I like dressing in drag for my stage shows. This is something I've always done. And just because now we have all this stuff going on, you want to make it about some political ideology, and it has nothing to do with that. So, I mean, you can go and look that up. Like, maybe I'll look for I'll leave the link to it and you can read about it yourself. I really do encourage that a lot. Go and research things yourself. You know, you keep talking about like these drag queen story times and saying something nefarious is going on. Okay, first of all, my understanding is they're not being forced at all. They're being held in public libraries, and it's completely optional whether you attend or not. And if you really think that something nefarious is going on, here's an idea: go to one and see if that's true. And if it's not true, well, now you know that. If it is true, do something to stop it, and you don't have to go in there with like baseball bats and guns and bear mace because like there's children in there. Call the cops. You know, do it the way you're supposed to do it. You know, like we live in a society that's organized, I guess. I'd be willing to bet though if you went to one, you would not see anything nefarious. And I think that they're going to get freaked out though if you show up in riot gear and you have like open weapons. You know, I think that's going to freak them out because they have been targeted. So you know, you have to bear in mind these kinds of things. You have to go in there in good faith and not dress like you're going to attack them, and realize what kind of characteristics the people look like who have attacked these events, and realize they're going to be on guard if you look like that. Even if you mean no harm, they're going to assume you mean harm because there's a particular look that these people who have attacked those events have. Anyway, back to this disgusting argument that these two people gave. I mean, like from a philosophical sort of lens, it's a terrible argument. So the premise is easily knocked down. Then, you know, their conclusion is basically go back into the closet because we think that if you're openly LGBTQ, it's going to make children LGBTQ. Well, I've just presented that there's no evidence of that. Now, I want to talk about like sort of this example of inductive reasoning because, I mean, you know, like you can't argue opinion as fact. That doesn't work. There is a way to argue opinion in a sound way. Usually this is just called inductive reasoning, and I got an example of this. So, and I challenge you to prove me wrong. So that this is really interesting how it works. This is a sound argument. Unicorns exist. All unicorns are invisible. No unicorns have been observed. Because all unicorns are invisible, they cannot be observed, and thus exist, not as a belief, but in real life. Since all unicorns exist but are invisible, they exist, wait, what did I do here? I put a typo. Since all unicorns exist but are invisible. Yeah, since all unicorns exist but are invisible, they just cannot be observed. Ergo, unicorns do actually exist. Can you really prove me wrong on that? They're invisible. They can't be observed. Can't see them. And that's why you think they don't exist. But they actually do exist. You just don't know it because they're invisible. They can't be observed. You can't observe them. That's a sound argument, but, you know, like we all know that's crap. I don't believe in unicorns. I don't do believe usually in general. I know unicorns don't exist. It's just the way that the argument is formed is deductively sound. And it would make sense. Like, if they did exist, the only reason why we wouldn't know that they exist is because they're invisible and they cannot actually be observed or interact with our reality. You would have to invent a special device, I guess, to be able to see them. That's not true. I'm just pointing out, like, you can say something, you can make a sound argument that is not based in actual fact, and it still be sound. But that's inductive reasoning. It's not deductive reasoning. And there's just no deductive argument to these conservative twins. None. And I just, yeah, bad argument. Like, and seriously, like what a lot of people like, and I see this across social media, it's like people come out, like I had somebody that was trying to obscure the moral line between insects and rabbits to justify the cruel animal abuse, torture, and treatment of rabbits by obscuring the moral differences of them. And it's like, oh my, like, they're like, I don't have time to sit here and go through the different dichotomies of all that, like, you know, like obviously you damn well know this. You can't sit there and tell me you don't know the difference between a parasite, a parasitic creature, or a pest, or something like a cockroach, compared to something like a cicada or a June bug that's pretty much harmless. And then you know in the animal world you have like pest type animals, you know, like rats that carry diseases that are problematic, or you know, like some moles that destroy your garden, and then something like a deer or a bunny rabbit or a cat doesn't really do anything. I mean, people categorize these things like outside of the biological references from environmental science. I don't have time to go through all that. Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? Like, you should know this because you're a human being and you're alive. Like, I don't have time to go through all that. But one of the things I do want to point out about the conservative twins is that when they bring up that, the gay thing isn't natural, one thing that I do not like is that, all these pseudo philosophical people, they like to throw out this phrase: appeal to nature is a fallacy. No, it's not. There is an entire line of philosophy that is dedicated to naturalist approach, naturalism. The thing is if you take a naturalist approach to philosophy, you're going to have to really change the way that you think about things in general. And, like I would tell, if I was sitting in front of the conservative twins and they said that to me, I'd say, if you are going to base whether if something is okay based off of what occurs in nature or what is observed in nature, then you've got a really big problem, because you better be able to take the stance of a moral nihilist. Because when it comes to nature, basically in nature, anything is permissible as long as it does not break the laws and rules of nature and physics. Anything. There are things that happen in the animal kingdom that if I were to say, okay, so this occurs in nature, is that okay? You'd be like, oh, absolutely not. That's the problem. If you go with the naturalist approach to philosophy, you have to argue, or be able to argue, from a moral nihilist perspective. And I hate to tell you, but from that perspective, no, there is nothing wrong with gay sex. Nothing. It is permissible. Because morality doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in nature. So yeah, it's permissible. If it's possible, it's permissible. So you better be prepared to do that if you take the naturalist approach. Oh my God. And that reminded me, there was another philosophical approach that I was going to talk about and it escapes me. Moral nihilist. Oh, right. The whole, this is also a fallacy, and it's amazing because you have an entire political party that's really dedicated to a logical fallacy: appeal to tradition. I think this is a problem with traditionalism, and unfortunately you can't get people to look at it, but technically in philosophy, logic, and critical thinking, it's a fallacy. Let me give you an example. It's very easy to figure this out. Just because they did something 200 years ago doesn't automatically mean that it's a good idea. They say they did this back in the 1800s, so why don't we do it today? It's like, well, they there's a lot of things that they did in the 1800s. I mean, they washed their body with lye. Do you want to go back to doing that? I mean, just because they did it in the 1800s, they washed their body with lye in 1800s, should we go back to washing our bodies with lye and subjecting ourselves to the possibility of chemical burns? They wiped their butt with corn cobs, dude. Just because they wiped their butt with corn cobs back in the 1800s, should we do that today? Is that what that means? See, this is just a bad argument. Or, the ancient Greeks and Romans did it, therefore we should do it. Why? The ancient Greeks and Romans believed that taking a ball of human feces and rolling around in herbs and spices, or really just herbs, and using that to dress a wound was a treatment for having a wound. Just because they did that, does that mean it's a good idea? No. We have a much better understanding of germ theory today, and we know that can cause sepsis, that can infect the wound. That's not going to help. You don't want to put human feces just because it's got herbs in it in your bloodstream. That's ridiculous. So that's why the whole appeal to tradition is a fallacy, is just because something happened in the past doesn't automatically make it a good idea. You have to make it a compelling case it's a good idea, that it's not just because it happened in the past. It's you would have to say, well, back in the 1800s, they did this and they had a 98% success rate. And then this thing that we're using today, because we don't want to use that, it only has, let's say, a 46% success rate. That's why I think we should go back to using this. Although not ideal, it had a much higher success rate than the thing that we're using today. That's not an appeal to tradition. That is making a case. That's a legitimate argument. But just saying LGBTQ, them queer people back in the 1800s and stuff, that they kept it to themselves and everything was better. No, everything was not better in the 1800s, and if you think everything was better in the 1800s, it wasn't because LGBTQ people were in the closet. No. And to the conservative twins, you would want to go back to the 1800s, you think everything was better back then? You guys, you realize you guys are a particular ethnic person that you wouldn't have had freedom. So I don't know that everything would have been. I don't know that this appeal to tradition is crap. It's crap. Just because we did something in the past doesn't automatically mean that it was a good idea. You have to make a case that it was a good idea because it worked better than what we're doing now, and you have to show evidence of that. And there's none. There is none. If anything, what we're doing is that things have been continuously getting better. That's reflected in crime statistics. It's reflected in the quality of life. It's reflected in life expectancy. It's reflected in a lot of different stuff. If we picked somebody up who lives today and dropped them like 200 in a time span like from 200, 300 years ago, I guarantee you would hate it. You'd say this sucks. This absolutely sucks. I mean, seriously, like granting people more rights and freedoms is a good thing. And those who hang on to tradition, they tend to make these sorts of arguments because change can be uncomfortable and it's pushing society in a direction that ultimately they're not familiar with. And we can find no, like, if you're going to make the accusation that it is dangerous, okay, why is it dangerous? Can you name the thing that's dangerous? And then once you name the thing that's dangerous, you have to provide evidence that that thing is being caused. And none of that has been done. Okay? And you can't just take like 4 examples of like, okay, here's 4 drag queens, or here's 4 trans people, here's 4 LGBTQ people that did something bad and say, well, therefore the entire LGBTQ community. That's a gross overgeneralization. Whatever happened to the concept of holding an individual accountable for their individual actions? Hello. That seems like an obvious way to conduct justice. You hold an individual accountable for their individual actions. You don't go, oh, one person in the Gothic community, or actually 2 people in the Goth community, ended up shooting up a school. Therefore, we need to outlaw the entire Goth community. Anyone who's Goth needs to take all their albums and all their CDs and burn them, get rid of their clothes, stop wearing the eyeliner and all this, that, and the other, and engage in uniformity and conformity, because when we do that, society functions better. For some reason, we think that. No, you hold those 2 people accountable for their individual actions. And, well, lo and behold, it's like, there have been cases of Gothic people, supposed Goth. I mean, they're not the only 2. There's been a few others, but predominantly, overwhelmingly so, the majority of people within the Goth community do not commit acts of violence. It's the same with LGBTQ people. And if you look at crime statistics, it's reflected in that. Like there's a specific crime that everybody keeps bringing up, and I'm not sure that I'm allowed to mention it on YouTube. You all know what I think I'm talking about. The initials of it are CP. The crime reports on that. The LGBTQ community only makes up 0.01% of that particular crime. And the highest demographic of the perpetuators of that crime tend to be heterosexual cis men. Yeah. And there's no ethnic boundary on that. It's white or black or Asian or Hispanic. None of that matters. It tends to be predominantly heterosexual cis men. Like Jared from Subway. And then, you have a smaller demographic that is, heterosexual cis female. Anyway, so that's my analysis. This argument from the conservative twins was basically nothing more than walking out into the public and running into a random stranger that just wants to argue their opinionated bullshit at you. And that's it. That's all it is. It's this is not something like if you made a paper based on the conservative twins argument in a logic and critical thinking or philosophy class in academia, the teacher would I wouldn't blame the teacher if they just crumpled it up and threw it in the garbage and said, I think you need to take a different class because you're not getting this. This is just junk. I mean, this is literally junk. This is the type of thing I would expect somebody who knows absolutely nothing. I mean, like who's had so little education, like seriously, just the humdrum average American, just that working class with a GED in high school. This is the kind of argument I would expect them to make. Now, when you watch Matt Walsh, he's actually clever. He's very manipulative. That's a different video. And as far as, and I'm going to show a screenshot, this guy, I have a video for you because that statement, well, I don't know. I keep saying I'll make a video. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I want to make a video. I can't make any promises, but I do want to make a video about this guy because this statement really pissed me off. There's 100, there's tons of reasons why this is just all wrong, okay? And I could list them, but I'm done with this video. So, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'm out.